The President. Members, please stand up while the Chief Executive enters the chamber. The Chief Executive. The Chief Executive will first address the Council. President, members, on the 8th of April, I attended the Chief Executive's question and answer session last. In the past 3 months, there's been close cooperation and check and balance between the executive and the legislature, and we have seen gratifying results in our legislative effort. Now, the Legislative Council has adopted a responsible attitude in passing the bill to improve the electoral system. This means that we could then proceed with the free elections in accordance with the relative timetable. On the 18th of July, we would be able to publish the provisional register for the election committee subsector elections. And in the 3 months, the Legislative Council passed 17 bills and is also scrutinizing another 13 bills. In the next few weeks, the various policy bureau will be tabling another 5 bills. If these bills could all be passed before the prorogation of this session, and then together with 9 other bills passed in April, that means in the legislative session 2020 to 21, a total of 45 bills would be passed. This is would be the most productive year in the past 20 years for legislative work. Now that we have returned to stability, and then there's now safeguard of national security and law and order, of course, the public would expect the SL government to enhance its governance. The SL government should be able to show greater determination and resolution in addressing long-standing problems in the community. Hundreds of thousands of people in Hong Kong would like their living condition and environment to be improved. There are many who have difficulties buying their homes, and this is, of course, a pressing social issue that we need to address. That's why yesterday, the Legislative Council debated a motion moved by a member on housing issue. Taking the opportunity today, I would like to review with members what we've done in the past on housing and land and what we expect to do in the future. Housing and land is, of course, a very important priority for this term of the government. In terms of land and housing supply, this is before the economy and livelihood issues on my list of priorities. And since 2018, it's become a separate standalone chapter in the policy address. Of course, if we want to improve the economy and people's livelihood, we need to have adequate supply of land. And I've made it clear in previously that there are 4 elements in my housing policy. First, we have to stress the government has an indispensable role. We should try to meet public needs by providing homes to home buyers. And also, we must also give support to those on the waiting list for public housing and those who are inadequately housed. Of course, if we want to build housing, we need land. And it's not something we can achieve in the short term to form land for development. Many have complained that government has been stalling matters by conducting consultation on land supply. And some complain that we are going for the more difficult options when there are easier options. But actually, under the leadership of the Secretary for Development, I could say that this is, this issue of land supply is like fighting a battle. We need to move forward with every inch we could. Now, and of course, there have been much resistance in the community because of the various issues, as only recently that we have returned to calm, and now we have a multi-pronged approach. So in Tung Chung and Northern Territories, there are major land formation exercises, and also we will continue to make the most of brownfield sites of farmland and greenfield sites. We also have plans of schemes for developers to release land they've been holding on to. And then we have speeded up other efforts such as redevelopment of squatter areas, civil servants co-op sites, industrial sites, industrial buildings, and so on. So where we are increasing the plot ratio to increase supply, and also we are taking active efforts to respond to the aspirations of the public to improve their living condition. And we're not just paying lip service. Last year, I announced that we have identified 330 hectares of land that could be used for the supply of housing in accordance with the 10-year target under the long-term housing strategy. We are also going full speed with the building of public housing. We expect in the next 5 years, 96,500 units will be completed. Compared to the 66,800 units before, is an increase of almost 50%. But then there are other public housing. There is a long waiting list for public housing, so there is still a long way from meeting that needs. We expect in the first half of the next 10-year period, there will still be tight supply. The Housing Authority and the revenue departments are trying to speed things up as far as they could, and I'm actually monitoring their effort personally. Apart from increasing public housing production, this term of the government has also achieved breakthroughs in a number of ways. First of all, on land supply, we are favoring public housing. In the past, the ratio between public and private housing is 60-40, and now it's changed to 70% in terms of the demand for land supply. Now, that shows that housing is no longer just a commodity, but at the same time, we have to give recognition to the fact that Hong Kong is a free and capitalist society with a free economy. We are an international financial center, so our policies may not be able to meet all the needs in the private housing sector, and we may not be able to adjust the housing prices. So the only way is to increase supply. That's the first point. Second point, the public have to give us support in farming land. They have to know that for housing builds, it's something affordable to them. Now we are providing more choices, housing choices, so we could form a housing ladder. At the same time, we are revising our sale flats policy. For subsidized sale flats, we have delinked it with market prices. Instead, we link it to the medium household income. And then each month we look at the mortgage to loan ratio, and it has to be not more than 40%. So these are the standards we go by in setting prices. Now, for example, in Diamond Hill, there is a new project now to be sold for a 400 square foot unit. The cheapest unit will be about $2.86 million. Now, if the price were linked to the market prices, then that's it's much cheaper by some $480,000. Thirdly, there is the starter home scheme. So for those who may have high income, but they may still not be able to buy their first home, and we're talking mostly young households. For example, say for a household that has a monthly income of $66,000 to $80,000, which is a three-person household, and they may have assets of not more than $2.2 million, they'll be eligible for buying starter homes. For the first project, there are about 500 units and is oversubscribed by 100%. In our plan, there are 3 other projects to be built by the Urban Renewal Authority and private developers, and they will be providing some 3,000 units in the urban areas. The fourth point. Now, members of this council have long been expressing this view, and we accept it. That is, they want the URA and the MTRCL to be involved in the development of public housing. For the URA, it will be providing more starter home units, and for the MTRCL will again be making use of railway facilities to develop housing, which is the first from 40 years ago. And then the first project will be in Sale Hall 1. And then fifthly, there will be collaboration between the government, the private sector, and the general public, and then we will have various measures to improve the poor living condition of those on the waiting list for public housing. We have now identified sites for building 15,000 units. Some 56% of the units will be provided by developers free of charge. And then these units will be built by private sectors, and then they will be handed over to the government for management. This will help to promote social harmony, and also it will give us more capital to meet the needs of the public. And then for grassroots families who are still not able to get public housing, now we have this rent assistance scheme that costs about $8 billion over 3 years. This is a cash allowance. And so for those who've been on the waiting list for more than 3 years, and maybe they meet the general criteria eligibility for public housing, we have issued application forms to them, and then we'll be starting to disperse the cash allowance starting from the end of this month. Yesterday, we tabled the Landlord and Tenant Consolidation Amendment Bill 2021. So we will spell out exactly the rights and obligations of landlords and subdivided unit tenants. So there will be safeguard offered to SDU tenants, and also we will cap the rate of rent increase, and then we will prohibit overcharging of public utility fees. Now, this council will end this soon, and then this term of government will also end soon. But housing and land will remain our top priority. In the coming year, I will be working harder on several fronts. One, I will be strengthening high-level supervision to make sure that there will be coordinated efforts among different departments. Secondly, for the artificial islands and in new territories north, we're going to speed up the revenue planning and study, so we make sure there will be enough land supply for the next 10 years. And thirdly, we are going to go for infrastructure first, and then we'll speed up the development of the railway network and road network before we develop housing. And fourthly, we're going to further streamline the various processes and workflows. So the relevant project coordination office and so on would be trying to speed up the approval process for various plans. And fifthly, we are going to consider further all urban renewal, and also we will deal with the safety and other aspects relating to old buildings. President, since the reunification, housing production in Hong Kong has been affected by a number of factors, but the root cause is because there's been no stable and steady supply of land, and there is not a land bank. So I believe the better solution to address the housing needs of the people is not about measures that we make from time to time, but rather we need to have determination to provide land. And so we need to make sure that there is land supply that's not affected by short-term economic cycles and other price fluctuation in the market. This term, the government has been doing that. We have shown our determination and courage in doing that, and we will continue to do so. Thank you. And now I'll be happy to take questions from members. Dr. N. Chan.
Chief Executive, at long last, the number of infection cases have been zero in the community for a month. But recently, we have seen a few imported cases leading to local infections, including the airport, the quarantine hotels. This goes to show that imported cases, if not properly controlled, will become a big loophole for more local infections. I understand that the airport authority has recently required all staff who goes into the closed area of the airport to display their vaccination records to show that they've been fully vaccinated, or to show a positive an effective negative result for the virus. But then for frontline workers that may come into contact with arriving passengers, such as staff of the Immigration Department, Customs and Excise, the quarantine staff, and staff in quarantine hotels, etc. So, Chief Executive, from the perspective of protecting the health and safety of employees, will the government consider mandating that these frontline workers be vaccinated so as to plug the infection loophole? Chief Executive, thank you, Dr. Zhang, for your question. In fact, Dr. Zhang's observation is very correct. After 4 waves of outbreak, now, if we have any local cases, it must be from imported cases, and therefore stopping the importation of the virus is a major strategy. Of course, we are under great pressure from the business sector and the community as a world commercial and financial center. If we do not allow travelers to come to Hong Kong, now we are under pressure and we are paying a considerable price, but we have no choice. We have to prevent imported cases from coming into Hong Kong. And we need to have flow of people with the mainland. So in dealing with the two concerns, sometimes there may be some correlation. And Dr. Zhang's idea is to get more people vaccinated. Now, all over the world, when it comes to using the law to mandate people to be vaccinated, we have not seen any of that first because it's bound to cause controversies. In Europe, we have seen protests against the government's requirement for them to be vaccinated. They call that a personal choice. In Hong Kong, we are pressing ahead in full steam. The airport authority is one good example you quoted. And then we've offered a choice. Before entering these places or to carry out such work, you have either to be vaccinated. If not, you have to be very frequently tested for the virus. And this is the strategy we adopt. So for a while, we have required frontline civil servants, totaling about 60,000. Now we have over 170,000 strong civil servants. Over 60,000 of them have been regarded as frontline civil servants, and they are required to either be vaccinated or be regularly tested. Our intention is to expand the scope so that more civil servants will come into this category, so they will either have to be vaccinated or be regularly tested. Now, for this 60 or 1,000 civil servants, the rate of vaccination is quite good. It's over 70% already. To further expand the scope, then the rate will further improve. And we are thinking of asking people to pay for their regular tests. We need to provide both a carrot and a stick. You can call an incentive or a penalty. This is our strategy. If we lightly compel everyone to be vaccinated, there might be problems. I understand that Dr. Zhang is concerned about our next step forward and the schools. Now, when the new term starts in September, we want things to be normal. Now, according to experience, for younger students in particular, without face-to-face classes will be rather detrimental, in particular to those from grassroots families. The Secretary for Education is conducting a survey. By end of July, information would have come back, and we are thinking of teachers and that will be handled in the way I just outlined. And the second is workers of elderly care homes. In fact, they've been very cooperative. We're now already in the 17th round of regular tests for the virus. But of course, vaccination is a more secure way, and we are using various ways and means in order to achieve this objective. All in all, I can't say that we will adopt an entirely mandatory approach with no alternative, because I'm afraid that would backfire. But we will keep monitoring the situation to see whether at some stage we need to take more stringent measures to ensure that we can build up this vaccine firewall. Now, looking back, our vaccination rate is steadily improving. Now, for the first jab, well, about 40% of the population have been covered. I hope everyone here and also the media here can help to appeal to the public to be vaccinated. Thank you. Mr. Kenneth Lau. Chief Executive, this year is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party. You went to Beijing to attend the celebration activities and to listen to the remarks of President Xi. The Chinese Communist Party is a ruling party, and they've contributed greatly to the development of the Chinese nation. And however, some of us here have prejudice, and they may not fully understand the content of President Xi's speeches. So, Chief Executive, are you going to organize seminars, symposiums, sharing sessions in order to disseminate the spirit and the content of President Xi's sayings to enhance people's understanding? Chief Executive, you might have noticed that there have been various celebration activities to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, and government officials have attended these activities to tell the relationship between CCP and the country, and to confirm the position of CCP as a ruling party. Within a short span of 1 year, I think we have seen changes. You can imagine 3 to 4 years ago, did we have such ambience in society so that we can talk about our ruling party more often? Given that we have this vibe in society, we must make good use of it. We should intensify Hong Kong people, especially the younger generation, the understanding of the country, their identity, and also the relationship between the CCP and the development of Hong Kong. We'll continue to do this. As far as I can recall, later we're going to have a major exhibition jointly run with authorities in the mainland to set out the development of CCP in the past 100 years and also its relationship with Hong Kong. Mr. Yu Siwing, Chief Executive, yesterday, a secretary told the media that the epidemic may go on until 2023 and 24, and that the government cannot subsidize the tourism sector for a few years in a row. And then the practitioners should be helped to switch trades. What the remarks of the secretary was most disappointing. I received chairman from 8 major trade associations asking me to put this question to the CE. Now, the tourism industry is one of the 4 pillar industries in Hong Kong. They have contributed a lot to our economy, our employment, our international image. Now, the tourism sector has been dealt a heavy blow by the epidemic. Although the government has launched a few rounds of subsidy schemes, however, the sector is really hard hit. The pessimistic remarks by the secretary, does that mean that the government is not going to help this sector and then they should only fend for themselves? Practitioners encouraged to switch trade. Does that mean that the tourism sector that is fighting so hard to stay afloat doesn't have to prepare for the future for the revival of the sector, and that they don't have to shoulder any social responsibility anymore? Mr. Yu Siu-wing, Chief Executive. Thank you, Mr. Siu, for asking this question for clarification. As pointed out by Mr. Siu, the tourism industry is one of our pillar industries. They've contributed to our GPD and are providing a lot of jobs, and there are external effects. They have brought business to our F&B and hospitality services, etc. On a previous occasion, I promised Mr. Yu that I'm going to personally steer the future of the tourism industry. So I chaired an interdepartmental meeting already. But then the greatest challenge is free flow of people. If we cannot reopen our orders with the mainland and Macau quarantine-free, then it is indeed hard to promote our tourism industry. We're not alone in this regard. All countries are facing a similar problem. But then we should make good preparation. When the time comes, when our borders can gradually be reopened, then we have a good basis for the tourism sector to start afresh. So I chaired an interdepartmental meeting, and in the Guangzhou and Macau GBA, well, we are seeing how we can develop this multi-destination mode of traveling. I'm discussing with the Ministry of Culture and Tourism of the country to see how tourism can revive gradually. I think it's difficult to revive individual travelers scheme and also tour groups and also multi-visits in a week, etc. But then in a gradual and orderly manner, I can say to Mr. Yu that these measures are bound to play a positive role in reviving our tourism industry. I hope Mr. Siu understands that in order the practitioners of the sector can sustain their livelihood or keep jobs during the difficult period where we can create jobs, we favor the tourism industry. For instance, in our community vaccination centers, we have provided positions to practitioners of the sector to take up. And for local tours, now, and this Cruise to Nowhere scheme, from what I gathered, is very popular and it will start soon. So all these will help to support the sector to ride over the difficulties so that when things are relatively normal, then I believe our tourism industry has a rosy picture, a rosy future, because we have very rich attractions. So we have the WK CD with world-class museums. We have the Kai-Tak development area with sports area. And we are going to have more international exhibitions and conferences in Hong Kong so that more visitors can come to see Hong Kong. So Mr. Yu, you can rest assured, I hope practitioners of this trade have heard what I said just now. Mr. Yu. Well, the sector has been frozen for 1.5 years. For some of the measures mentioned by the chief executive, they are just a drop in the ocean, including Cruise to Nowhere and local tours. They can't really help too much, and the medium and long-term plans are no good to them. when it comes to the current difficulties. I think there should be more specific supporting measures to stabilize the confidence of the practitioners so that they can ride out the difficult period. I've talked with the secretary recently, but it seems that he is short of measures to help. These measures may help a little, but they cannot really stabilize the situation. A motion moved by me to support the tourism industry was passed. That means all members here agree with me and that there should be assistance and support to the tourism sector. So, Chief Executive, can you listen to the aspirations of the sector more, and so that there can be more powerful and more specific ways to support our sector?
Executive, yes, I support various measures that we could do to help the tourism sector. As you know, we've just started the consultation exercise on the coming policy address. Now, for measures that are practicable and that we could afford, then we don't need to wait for the policy address. So we welcome concrete suggestions from the member. Thank you. Mr. Peter Shiu. First of all, I would like to thank the Chief Executive in leading the principal officials in overcoming the various challenges we've seen in Hong Kong, such as the Hong Kong-style color revolution, the Black Flag riots, and the pandemic. Now, with the promulgation of the national security law and improvement to the electoral system, we see that the order is slowly being restored. And then in the past in the past 30 days or so, we can see that we are also having effective control over the pandemic. And the local economy is slowly recovering. On tourism, now I hope you would talk to the. You said that you would talk to the country on resuming travel across the boundary. Now, of course, 80% of our travel has to do with cross-boundary travel, and 20% is international travel. So we're glad to hear that there may be resumption of travel. Now, for people, mainlanders, if they go to Hainan for shopping, businesses will enjoy $100,000 of tax-free income. But then for people coming, can the Chief Executive talk to the mainland authorities? That is, every year we'll offer $100,000 of tax-free quota to mainland visitors coming to shop in Hong Kong, and that would surely help to boost the tourism sector when cross-boundary travel resumes. Thank you for your concrete suggestion that could help the tourism and retail sectors in Hong Kong. Perhaps I could look at the bigger picture. Let me take a macro view. Now, the central authorities have adopted two major initiatives. One is the promulgation of the national security law, and the other is improving the electoral system. So this has given me more confidence that there will be stronger support from the central authorities. Well, this will ensure the long-term stability and prosperity in Hong Kong. Also, it will create a condition for us to be better integrated into the national development of the country. So, of course, I would try to strive for more support for Hong Kong as far as possible. But whether I will succeed or not, I'm sure you know that the main authorities would also have the considerations. For Hainan, the central authorities have decided on the niche of Hainan. So there are many preferential policies. We envy that. Other provinces and cities also envy these preferential treatment for Hainan. For example, they have this tax-free quota, and also there are preferential measures to encourage the healthcare sector to go to Hainan. But as I said, I will talk to the various ministries on the mainland. There's strong support given to us under the 14th five-year plan. Under that framework, I will propose various concrete measures. I'll bear in mind the one you've suggested, of course. But please don't think that whatever I say to the main authorities, they will agree to that. Of course, the central authorities also have to consider the bigger picture. Mr. Peter Shiu. Well, that measure I proposed would help the tourism and the retail sector in Hong Kong. It will also go some way to addressing the conflicts between Hong Kong people and mainland visitors. So I hope there will be more publicity to say that Hong Kong welcomes visitors from the mainland. chief executive. Well, I have to speak on that point here. For a long time, in the past few years, there have been people in Hong Kong who were actually driving away visitors from Hong Kong. There were people who wanted to come to Hong Kong for travel or business, but then they had very poor impression of Hong Kong when they came here. So if we want to strive for more policy support from the CBG in helping our tourism and retail sector, we must first improve our own image. So the 5 offices on the mainland of the Hong Kong government are doing exactly that. We want to change the negative perception mainland people have on Hong Kong, so that when cross-boundary travel resumes, then people will be more happy to come to Hong Kong. Mr. Vincent Zhang, well, the Tokyo Olympic Games will open next week, and there was a ceremony, and the chief executive wished our team great success. Now, many young people are trying to strive for excellence, and our sportsmen and women went all the way to Tokyo during this difficult time just because they want to pursue their dreams, and also they want to strive for the honor of Hong Kong. And then in recent months, we've seen that there are many, singing contests on TV and so on, and they're very popular. Now, soon there will be the Kai-Tak Sports Crown, the M+, and the Palace Museum and so on. All these will be coming on stream. So in supporting arts and culture and sports, would you be doing more? For example, would you apply to bring more mega events to Hong Kong? Maybe there could be Asian Youth Games and so on, because we have many major facilities coming on stream. So do you have any plans to nurture talents locally? Thank you, Mr. Zhang. On creative industries, arts and culture, I've all along believed Hong Kong has an advantage. Now, these industries will help to promote the standard of living of Hong Kong people. It will help to promote cultural appreciation and so on. At the same time, of course, these are also industries. Now, in the 14th five-year plan just announced, for the first time, there's a position of Hong Kong as cultural and art exchange center. So that means there will be many opportunities for us. So how are we going to develop the cultural industry, especially in the Greater Bay Area? Because the Greater Bay Area is an immense market. It could, of course, take on many financial services, businesses, as well as cultural services. There is a population of 86 million people in the Greater Bay Area, so it's a huge economy, and so there is therefore huge potential for development of the local arts and culture industries. The government will certainly do more in this respect. Of course, we've laid a good foundation with what we've done in the past. Many people may have various views on the West Kowloon Cultural District, but it's actually a very important development and investment that we're making to promote the status of Hong Kong in arts and culture. And of course, next we need to do more training, and we need to facilitate young people joining the industry, and of course we need to promote international exchange. So Mr. Zhang, please rest assured, now we are able to strive for the positioning of Hong Kong as a culture and art exchange center. In the 14th five-year plan, definitely we're going to do a lot more to make that happen. Now, Mr. Vincent Zhang mentioned the Tokyo Olympic Games that are about to be open. Now, for our team, our athletes, we've managed to obtain many opportunities to join the scheme this year, which is a new record. So I hope Hong Kong people will rally behind them and support them. Now, with sports, we try to promote elite sports as well as popular sport. With elite sport and mega sports events, definitely when the Kai-Tak Sports Park is open, we're going to bring more mega events here. And we are now actively looking for mega events that could be brought to Hong Kong. As for elite sports development, in the past decade, we have invested much in that. We've also given much funding to the Institute of Sports, to the Hong Kong Sports Institute, and we're seeing results. And then there will be an expansion of the Hong Kong Sports Institute, and then there will be dedicated training grounds for specific sports. And of course, where there are more opportunities or the room for development, definitely we will support the development of sports in Hong Kong. Mr. Vincent Zhang, thank you for your effort to promote arts and culture. I've heard from the industry that if, say, we could apply for the Asian Youth Games in 2029 or beyond, it would help to promote sports here in Hong Kong. So would you consider it with the Home Affairs Bureau? Definitely will do so. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Now, since the black-clad violence and pandemic, the grassroots workers have been severely hit. They have striving to make ends meet, especially for those working in the tourism sector. Now, labor unions and labor representatives are duty bound to strive for the rights and interests of workers. So we need to improve their working condition. Now, there is a piece of legislation that's closely related to workers. I hope you would look into that and consider amendments. That is the protection of wages in insolvency ordinance. This ordinance was amended in 1996, but it's been 25 years. There have been no further amendments. At the moment, the compensation amount is $36,000, but it's set on the basis of the wage level in 1995. So now the median wage is $19,000. So therefore, the compensation amount should be $76,000 instead. Now, the insolvency fund has a balance of $6.2 billion, and there are just about 3,000 cases or so each year. So there wouldn't be much of a financial burden on the fund. So would you amend the relevant ordinance as soon as possible to enhance the protection for employees when businesses go bankrupt? Chief Executive, of course, for leaders of the labor sector, they have the duty to fight for the interests of workers. For this term of government, I would say to a certain extent we do favor workers. In fact, when I ran for the election, I didn't make any pledge about labor issues, because I've seen in the past pledges were made, but they could not be delivered. So that's why I dared to not make such pledges. But then in the past few years, because there's understanding of the community and employers, so we've been able to make much improvement to labor rights, for example. We've added 4 more weeks of maternity leave, and then last week, with mutual understanding, you passed the legislation to align statutory holidays with general holidays. I will also direct the Labour and Welfare Bureau to speed up the amendment bill on offsetting mechanism for MPF, under the MPF. As for this protection for workers, in relation to wages when there's insolvency. Well, I don't know much about it, but I'll definitely look at it but you mentioned the ordinance not been amended for over 20 years, so there's already a prima facie case for me to look into that. So I will ask the Labour and Welfare Bureau to review the ordinance to see if there is need to update it. Mr. Poon Siu Ping, thank you for your response, Chief Executive. I said that the government has the duty to improve labor rights. So can you undertake that the Secretary for Labour and Welfare will submit the relevant bill within this term of the Council? Well, I can't really give you a firm commitment because it's already mid-July. And just now I mentioned there will be 5 more bills to be tabled, and hopefully these bills could be passed before the end of this term of the Legislative Council, which is the end of October. So this is already a very aggressive timetable. So probably in reality, it cannot be done. I ask for understanding, Mr. Pu, but definitely I will pay personal attention to the review of this ordinance. Thank you.
Mr. Lee, Chief Executive, I've checked with records. On the 17th of March, on the 28th of April, and the 2nd of June, DAB, on 3 C question times in a row, Mr. Carrie, Chen, myself, and Mr. Wong Ting Kong respectively asked about the reopening of borders between Hong Kong and the mainland and Macau. It's not just DAB that is anxious about this. Many people in Hong Kong, whether they're in the business sector now for business reasons, for family reunion, for dispensing of drugs, and for going to school, and for attending funerals. Well, every day we've been asked on a daily basis whether DAB can put this to the CE, and that to ask the government to create favorable environment for reopening the borders. Now, the CE, earlier on, you told the media that you have already reflected such views to the Central People's Government and the relevant departments and ministries, and the report has been submitted. In fact, the community is very eager to know the state of communication of your view with the Central People's Government. Can you give us an update of your communication with the Central People's Government? And Chief Executive, do you have any roadmap and plan for and timetable for reopening the borders? Thank you. I have to reiterate that whether we're talking about business travelers or individual travelers, or for the family reunion, for going to school, etc., I fully appreciate their aspirations, and that's exactly why whenever I have the chance to meet with officials of the mainland and also leaders of Guangdong province, I press them on this point, and perhaps they already feel a bit bothered by me, but I think this has to be done in due course and in a timely manner. Usually, the Chief Executive cannot disclose reports to the Central People's Government or my discussion with the Central People's Government. But I said the report has been submitted, and this is not the first time I have submitted such a report. Now, whenever I feel that the time is ripe, of course, when the outbreak is really serious, I cannot make such a report. In November last year, before the 4th wave of outbreak came, we were in a position with the right conditions to allow a certain quota of people to go to Guangdong province for certain reasons, but that's confined to the Guangdong province. Unfortunately, the time, the opportunity went away when the 4th outbreak came. Now, we have to create the right conditions now, including vaccination. 40% of our population has received the first jab. I'm afraid that there is not a very favorable condition. So if people are eager to visit the mainland quarantine-free, then the first thing to do is to make an appointment for receiving the vaccine. Now, if we can achieve at least a 70% vaccination rate, then we will be in a better position to ask for a resumption of flow of people between the two places. And the second thing to do is to stop the importation of cases. Now, you can imagine the warlike situation in the mainland whenever there is an imported case. Now, it's not just the mainland government alone. No government would want to open their borders to high-risk visitors spreading the virus in the community when they have been trying so hard to control and fight the epidemic in their own community. So we will enhance the vaccination rates, and then we should also stop imported cases. I hope that the community can understand. Now, if we create too many quarantine-free channels, then that would undermine the arrangement with the mainland for flow of people between the two places. I'm just as anxious, if not more, than you, Ms. Sari Lee. Still, we need the right conditions before we can achieve the result. Ms. Sari Lee, the community is very anxious. We understand that you and your team are very anxious, but people have been waiting for too long. Can you consider setting a timetable so that together we can check up the vaccination rates? And what about our communication with Macau? Can you start with Macau first? As far as I know, the flow of people with Macau will be considered in the whole picture. As I said, the Macau authorities of the view that 0 cases in 28 days in a day is not the absolute condition for reopening the borders. And as for the timetable, of course, I want a timetable for our vaccination program. Earlier on, we said that hopefully before the end of the summer vacation, that is in around end of August or September, we can attain a 70% vaccination rate. We are still a far cry from that, so we really need to work hard. Mr. Jeffrey Lam, Chief Executive, in your address and questions to answers today, you mentioned the business sector a number of times. I believe there should be close collaboration between the government and the business sector, and we're grateful to you for heeding the voices of the business sector. The business sector has made a number of requests to you, including reopening the borders. Now that the epidemic situation is stable, we hope that in August or September we can have partial reopening of our borders. Chief Executive, you said on a TV program recently that in your 4 policy addresses you had 900 measures, and only a few of them were not implemented. Can you tell us specifically what are the policies or measures that are really close to your heart? Hopefully, you can achieve them before the end of this term of government so that you can put a perfect full stop to your term. I understand that there are things that may have to roll over to the next term of government. Now, you want the next term of government to carry forward your conviction for this year. Do you want to be a part of that? I think, Mr. Jeffrey Lam, you don't have to be so tortuous in putting that question to me. Yes, with the hard work of my team and support of the civil service, in the past 4 years, we have seen unprecedented challenges in Hong Kong. So for 2 years, we were close to a standstill, but then I've been able to implement most of the measures in my platform. Most of them have been completed. Some of them have suffered some slippage, and we have to catch up. And for policies that are not implemented at all, there are not too many. Well, in fact, I want to have triage of the 3 tunnels. Unfortunately, I didn't get the support of the council, but that can't be helped. If things are acceptable to the community, we will implement them. Still, I won't feel frustrated. Now, we still have a long way to go. We have now restored one country, 2 systems back to the right track. We have political and national security. We don't have to worry about the government being overturned. I think we should have a longer vision. Now, we are not a government with ruling parties. Now, for the country, the CCP has been in power for 100 years. They had the room to plan for the better future of the Chinese people. Now, in Hong Kong, we are not talking about horizon of 100 years, but we can afford to be more farsighted, in particular in land planning and economic development. Looking ahead, I hope we can all have the confidence. Hong Kong has a very solid foundation. The National 14th Five-Year Plan has allowed Hong Kong to be 8 hubs. To be hubs of 8 different areas. And because of the GBA, we are at a very advantageous position. So I hope we can all be forward-looking and fight for a better future in Hong Kong in particular, create more opportunities for young people to enrich their lives. And in the process, let me repeat that the business sector is of utmost importance. Mr. Jeffrey Lam, Chief Executive, I asked what are specific things that are very close to your heart. You mentioned education among them. In fact, education has got a lot of problems. First, I thank you for your concern for the business sector, but for education, we can't afford to wait for 1 or 2 years. There is a lot more to do in this 2 years. So, Chief Executive, can you tell us in the coming year what are you going to do to help our education sector? Chief Executive, I dare to say that we have some deficiencies in our education since the reunification, in particular, a sense of identity with the country and understanding of one country, 2 systems. We have a lot to catch up. And in the past 2 years, we have made some breakthroughs. For instance, in 2018, we have made Chinese history mandatory subjects in junior secondary schools. And then this year, we have this citizen and social development subject to replace liberal studies. And then we are rolling out national security education in schools, and we have asked the school sponsoring bodies to improve their governance, and they should not be weak when it comes to teachers that have breached national security law. In the past 20 years or so, we have seen room for improvement in the education sector, so we have to very proactively improve our education system so that we can groom a new generation that have a sense of the community, of the country, a sense of belonging, and with a world horizon. And we will continue to do such work. I'm pleased to see that in recent years, now we used to say that the education sector was very lopsided politically. But recently, from headmasters and school sponsoring bodies I have met, now they agree to what we are doing and what we have done. Ms. Alice Mack, in the Chief Executive's policy opening remarks, she mentioned a lot of things close to the heart of the community. In fact, in this council for a few weeks in a row, we have got motion debates on housing supply. Well, recently, in the anti-North development, for 7 years, we've spent $1 billion on research studies only, with no progress in development. With the hard work of the administration, they have shortened the time for the feasibility study, but only to 5 years. The CE said that she would enhance steer and would not allow policies or to be fragmented. This is very heartening. Now, the CE said that to address the housing problem, we must have unrelenting courage so that we can have a rosy future. Now, with your unrelenting courage and persistence or perseverance, Chief Executive, will you review all relevant legislation, including town planning ordinance and the protection of the harbor ordinance, to remove all red tapes so that we can shorten the time for land formation? Will you exhaust all means, including changing our taxation system? Now, in this council chamber, you promise to introduce vacancy tax, a tax on vacant flats, and then introduce a tax on value on capital gain. Chief Executive, when the policy bureaus submitted funding applications for feasibility studies. Well, many members, including Ms. Alice Mack, would query how come such studies would take so long. And I think Ms. Alice Mack has just supplied the answer. This is because of legislation involved. Now, we have very long statutory procedures, including reclamation of the harbor, and environmental impact assessment, which would take at least 10 months. And for town planning, rezoning usually is 9 + 3, 12 months, not taking into account a possible judicial review. I hope that we'll see fewer judicial reviews in the future so that we can shorten the rezoning procedures. I think we're going to streamline and condense these procedures. Within the Development Bureau, they have the land planning procedures to shorten the processing time. In last year's policy address, I authorized the Secretary for Development to consider other issues now if transport and lands, etc., are also in the same process. The Secretary for Development can see whether there is any room for further condensation of time. Yes, Ms. Alice Mack mentioned 2 ordinances. I'm afraid that within this term of government, we can't undertake to review these 2 major ordinances. Hopefully, the next term of government can rationalize such statutory requirements. But these statutory requirements are law, all because of certain background. Protection of the harbor ordinances because Hong Kong people's love for the harbor. And Hong Kong people love our countryside equally. Now, we can't just overhaul our legislation simply because we are eager to have land. Without the community support, that is impossible. Town planning ordinance is a public engagement process so that the community can understand propose land users that they would not support, and then they can make representations to the town planning ordinance or town planning board. We cannot overhaul these ordinances overnight, but of course, everything has room for improvement. Taxation is even a more sensitive system. Issue Hong Kong is an open, free place of a low and simple taxation rate. It seems that the whole world is considering their own taxation system. I cannot lightly undertake that for the sake of land development, the SL government will work on our taxation system.
Ms. Alice Mack, the Chief Executive said she has unswerving courage to do something. I believe that's true. Okay, let's not even talk about the new taxation regime. Now, you promised before that you would introduce the vacancy tax for first-hand flats. So are you going to do within this year? Because Mr. Frank Chan has already prepared the referendum bill. So with the unswerving courage and determination you have, would you introduce the vacancy tax on first-hand flats? Again, can you tell us again? Well, you know, with courage, it's actually just 2 sides to the coin. Now we're going to strive with courage and improve or provide more land supply. But then for certain measures that would not be supported by the public, then we would not launch it in such a short period of time. Now there are only 3 months left in this term, in this legislative session, and I have only less than 12 months left in my term. So I can't really give you an undertaking so lightly. All I can tell you is that what I can do in the remainder of my term and what would have to be considered in the next term. You've already followed up on your question, Mr. Wilson-All. Thank you, President. Now, Chief Executive, you and your team have worked very hard to identify more land for housing, and then there are short-term relief measures to support the inadequately housed. It shows that you have determination to address the housing and land issue. But then land is the very core of housing issue. If there's no land, of course we can't have housing. Just like if we don't have flour, how can we make bread? Now, the chief executive just now for New Territories North, you're going to promote development as far as possible. There's a site in Yuen Long because there's it's going to be collocation at the Huanggang cross-boundary crossing. Then some 20 hectares of land would be freed up eventually. But then what do you plan to do for this site? How come it has to be combined with the studies on Santine and Lok Ma Chau node? And it would take 2 to 4 years before you complete this study. So people of Hong Kong and I really don't get it. Now we're talking about a huge site of 20 hectares. There's no need to reclaim, to resume land, and there's no need for people to be moved away. So there's no need for compensation. How come you have to combine this site with the Santine and Lok Ma Chau node for study? What's your consideration? Chief Executive, thank you for your question. We're coming to a new view on the development of the New Territories North, and Mr. Kenneth Lau, we're grateful to him for certain views. Now, so we shouldn't just look at New Territories North in a fragmented manner. We shouldn't just be looking at, say, Ha Chun, Hung Shui Kiu, Man Kam Tao. Rather, we need to look at the North, anti-North in a comprehensive manner. And then for Shenzhen, Hong Kong, there's going to be a cross-boundary economic belt. That's a new concept. I have to bear that in mind. So about the relocating the cross-boundary point to Shenzhen, and then with the freed up the 20 hectares of land, what plan do we have for it? Well, I can't say. At this moment, we need to look at the development of New Territories North as a whole. So I hope in the remainder of my term, I'll be able to report to you on our decision. Now, people are, having a hard time with the housing condition. Then, so I hope you would address this very pressing issue. With this 20 hectares of land, they could actually provide some 10,000 housing units. I hope you reconsider whether you could give priority to the development of public housing on this 20 hectares of land. Would you reconsider that? Thank you. Thank you. Chief Executive, in my reply to Ms. Alice Mack's question, I have said that with any land development, there has to be a process to be followed, and we have to consider supporting development as well. For example, if this is a site and near the boundary, it doesn't mean that because it's freed up, then it could become land for housing tomorrow. In any case, for the Huanggang cross-boundary point, the new one would only be ready in 2 to 3 years. So we may not be able to use the site for housing for now. In any case, we're going to take a comprehensive look at the site freed up, and we'll see what purpose would best fit the site. Because you might recall, for the Huanggang cross-boundary point, is very close to our sites for development of innovation and technology. So we need to take a comprehensive look. And as I've said, we have to consider ways that could boost capacity so that we could meet the housing needs in New Territories North. Mr. Kwok Wai Keung. There's still no news on resumption of cross-boundary travel or travel as a whole. And so that has restricted development of a revival of the economy and tourism sector. And tourism workers are having a hard time, of course, even for cross-boundary students, they will still have to just take online classes because there's no resumption of cross-boundary travel. Okay, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, but what about economic transformation after the pandemic? Do you have any long-term plan? For example, zero labor work policy. Of course, there's that means there is zero protection for workers when people are made to go for self-employment. Now, in other countries, there are laws now to regulate such zero contract workers issues. But in Hong Kong, you're not doing anything. You say you will have to wait and see. And you've not changed the policy of 4 weeks and 18 hours of continuous employment definition and so on. And what do you, so you need to do something to protect workers, because we've seen casualties at the workplace. Now, Mr. Kwok, of course, has been fighting for the interests of workers all along. Now, in Hong Kong, I believe the pandemic would not have such a negative impact on our economy and labor and the labor sector, because Hong Kong is a compact city. In other places, probably they'll become used to the work from home arrangement, but it's not necessarily the case in Hong Kong. Of course, we're seeing an increase in online shopping activities, but then I've been told that they would not replace physical shopping. So there's still a future for physical retail sector in Hong Kong. So I'm afraid that won't be a priority for us. Now with zero, for casual workers, I think we have to make sure there won't be many labor disputes. Given the current economic situation, we need to promote legal protection for workers. Now, these are all major issues, and it's not something we could, proceed with at the moment. Dr. Priscilla Leung. Chief Executive, I know you care very much about livelihood issues. A few days ago, there's some old lady who's blind, and she's she's been hit on the head because she lives in an old Shipmate estate flat, and then some concrete fell from the roof. Now she's blind, but she was lucky. But then eventually she sought help from the housing department. The housing department told her that if repair is done, then she has to pay for the air conditioner. And so she doesn't have money, so nothing can be done. And then when her son came to visit her, a huge chunk of concrete fell and injured his foot, so he had to be sent to hospital. You can see for these old public housing estates, they look nice from outside because there's new paint and everything. But then it's like a lady with cosmetics. She may look nice, but actually she's not that healthy. Now we took Mr. Frank Chang to the estate some time ago, and the BPA has been saying that there are some 19 old public housing estates that require redevelopment. If you could remove the red tape, then instead of 66,000 people being housed, you could house 200,000 people in the redeveloped estates. But then with the housing department, it has rigid and outdated policies. They believe that that if they change anything, it will affect those already on the waiting list. That's why they're not liberalizing their rules. Now, on the newspaper, there have been front page story following this case for 3 days. Now, we found that in 8 years, only 3 housing estates were redeveloped by the housing department. Now, I'm sure I have great confidence in you, Chief Executive. You want to do something, definitely it will get done. For example, it's like the Tai Hang West estate. So, Chief Executive, would you lead the House Department and the Revenue Policy Bureau to remove the red tape, so some 200,000 people could then be housed, and that is actually the dream. Chief Executive, 3 years ago, BPA put forward the suggestion of redeveloping public housing estates. At the time, I had a discussion with the Transport and Housing Bureau and the Housing Department. Well, the difficulties are not with liberalizing the measures as suggested by Dr. Priscilla Leung, or that we don't have the determination to do it, but rather it's about supply. Because for these people living in public old public estates, yes, they are staying in public estate, although you may say the facilities are lacking, but at least they have a roof over their head. And then there are over 100,000 people on the waiting list for public housing. You know how poor their housing condition is. They are living in subdivided units. They have to pay exorbitant rents. So I have actually considered the entire redevelopment program. And I find that if we are to proceed with the program and we give priority to the rehousing of tenants affected, that means we won't have so many newly completed units for those on the waiting list. So I think for us, the biggest challenge is who we should help, who need help most. And we decide that we should help first those who are inadequately housed. And so for newly completed units, they should be allocated to those on the waiting list rather than using these units for rehousing tenants in old housing estates. So it's still a question of supply. If we could find enough land, and the Housing Authority does have the resources to build units, so it's all about finding land supply. That's why I talked about land supply at the beginning of this session. So it's not that individual departments are being bureaucratic, they don't want to do anything, but rather we have studied all the figures. If we are going to redevelop these older housing estates, that will actually have an impact on the waiting time on the waiting list, and we're not happy with the 6 years of waiting time now on average. So we cannot really promise that we would start redevelopment of housing assets. But of course, for individual units where there are safety issues, then I would encourage the housing department to help tenants as far as possible. They shouldn't just focus on the external walls. We do go and visit units, and where there's room to improve the condition, the safety of tenants in public housing estates, will definitely do so.
Dr. Priscilla, Chief Executive. Well, for that case, it was given special treatment because it became a big issue, and then Mrs. Leung, in the case, was rehoused. Now, we're not asking for jumping the queue, but I just want to say that the case of Tai Hang West is a successful example. So we should think about removing the red tape. So for those like elderly persons or persons with disabilities, they can be rehoused in the local neighborhood, and then other residents can be in batches moved to temporary or transitional housing. And that's why we have pressed time and again this issue. Now, I think the breakthrough of Tai Hang West Estate is really carries hope for us, and I hope under your leadership, government departments will be able to address these remaining 19 housing estates. They all want redevelopment. And then those on the waiting list will have more choices because these are really at prime locations. Chief Executive, Dr. Leung, URA is the cause for the redevelopment of Tai Hang West Estate. It adopts another mechanism and is not really subject to the situation I mentioned. That is more than 100,000 people on the waiting list, and housing department would certainly not work on Tai Hang Site Estate in that way. Now, this is exactly where the challenge lies. Now we have to ensure the quality and safety of old housing estates, and that is the housing department's responsibility. So, Mr. Frank Chan, please take care. Mr. Michael Tian. Now, on the question of one country, two systems, many boundaries and definitions are now clear, and the community has more or less gone back to the right track. But for reception of entertainment on the part of public officials, we don't have clear guidelines. Now, of course, public officials cannot shy away from meeting the public, otherwise they'll be criticized for being out of touch with realities. But there must be some form of regulation. And as for tenancy control, FSDUs, now, Mr. Michael Tian, you're only allowed to ask one question and you have to wait for a reply from the CE first. No, I'm not asking a question. These two are not my questions. It's just an expression of my opinion. No, this is a CE question time. All right, my question is coming. Please allow me. Now, Chief Executive, you said you have submitted a report to the Central People's Authority for reopening the borders. You have my full support in this regard, but I'd like to know whether you have communicated with the biggest stakeholder here, that is the Guangdong province. If you say yes, I'm a bit puzzled because our infection measures are very different from that of Guangdong. Now, for travelers from high-risk places, they have to undergo 21 days of quarantine period. They have to be tested for the antibodies and for the virus, whether they are vaccinated or not, that doesn't matter. Now, for us, vaccination is the crux, and if you've been vaccinated, you can reduce the number of quarantine from 21 days to 14 days, and then here we do not test for antibodies. Now, the control measures are so different between the two places. Once the borders are open, then they will have to pass the gatekeeping road to us. Now, I don't want to discuss who will stand to gain more from this reopening of the borders, but I'm sure they would not want to bear the risk from us. So have you communicated with them? Because this is of utmost importance. You mentioned submitting a report to the Central People's Government. Did you have the support of the Guangdong authorities? Chief Executive. Thank you, Mr. Tian, for your question. While our borders are with the Guangdong province, our land crossings are with the Guangdong province, but I have discussed with the Customs and Excise and the NDC and also various departments of the central authorities. Of course, we have discussed with Guangdong last November. We were about to have partial reopening of the borders. I personally discussed with the mayor, with the governor of Guangdong province. But we understood that it was impossible to have entirely consistent quarantine measures or infection control measures, and it lies with the difference in system. Now, we do not have this advantage of sealing off a small area, a small district when there is a single case. We don't want to affect the daily lives of residents here. What we're doing here has the approval of the remaining authorities. Whenever there is a single case, we cordon off or close the area, restrict and test approach. And people only allowed to leave if they are tested negative. This is to ensure that the disease or the virus will not spread in the community. When there is a single case with a positive result, he will be quarantined and treated at hospital. Now, we're not asking for entirely identical infection control measures between Hong Kong and the main authorities. There is no such hard target before the borders can be reopened. So there is a process. We have to explain to them that we are capable of controlling the epidemic. A year or so back, we were not that able. But now we can do up to 120,000 tests per day. We have 4,500 quarantine units to be activated And we have got another 800 negative pressure wards with the help of the Central People's Government. So we'll continue to prevent the importation of the disease, but we may not entirely have the same system as the mainland, but we'll ensure that the virus will not spread in our community. If in the unfortunate event that the virus has spread in the community, we have demonstrated that we have the ability to contain them so that there will be no community outbreak. Well, since June, we have 3 or 4 episodic local cases, but they were imported, but they had not caused any community outbreak that was very different from the dancing cluster and other clusters. So this is our approach. And we will discuss with the central authorities, the Guangdong and Shenzhen authorities in this way. Mr. Michael Tian, Chief Executive, when it comes to containing the virus in the community, I will give you a 99.5 score, if not 100. You really did an excellent job. My concern is imported cases, because from high-risk cases, the number of quarantine days is from 21 down to 14, and we do not test for the antibodies, and this is cause for worry on the part of the mainland. Now, many people have not been vaccinated for false negative cases. They might come in, and there they would not cut the number of quarantine days because of vaccination, whereas we are doing that. So you are sure that the Guangdong province knows what we are doing and what we plan to do, and they have undertaken that what you do will not affect their timetable of reopening the borders. With the central blessing, then everything will happen when the conditions are right. Is that right? No, this is not the case. The Guangdong province hasn't given us any undertaking when it comes to reopening the border between us. The scheme we agreed on back then is no longer here. We have to reactivate the discussion. It's just that the discussion will not be entirely between the Guangdong and Shenzhen authorities. We must have instruction from the Central People's Government first. Dr. Zheng Chongtai, I don't know whether you recall, Chief Executive, that in your first policy address, I was also the first to ask this question, whether the Chief Executive, the AR, will come under the ambit of the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance. Now, this is an issue now. When it comes to probity and integrity, I agree that as the Chief Executive or head of the civil service, I truly believe that you are an example of probity and integrity. But that is not good enough. And if we want to have a corruption-free society, now in the past 6 months, many people were asked that since that we have got an improved electoral system, and since there will be a major reorganization of the government, how come for recent incidents, in particular the scandal involving 3 senior officials, they would bring the SAR government and the community, they have caused embarrassment to our government, to our community, and to you yourself, who is an example of probity. Now, yesterday, Secretary said that officials had to meet with people in the community, but such a meeting has caused too much unnecessary speculations. Why can't you be more accountable? Now, what is left here in the SAR after so many years is our probity. Can you tell us that when it comes to our fight against corruption, can we maintain the standard expected of the civil service here, and to ensure that such a system will not be a tool for attacking another fraction or political enemies. Now, of course, I will not speculate that that is the cause of the scandal, but if we can have a mechanism that is maintained here, that everyone believes, I think this is the only thing we have left to maintain this very important core value of Hong Kong. Mrs. Lam, can you in any way tell us, starting from day one, now I'm very concerned about corruption and probity in Hong Kong. Now what you can do here is, apart from you yourself, how is our government performing? Thank you. Chief Executive. First, Dr. Zhang said that he understood when when a place is entirely clean and corruption-free. I have to tell you that in the civil service, we must be entirely free of corruption at all costs. And this is the Central People's expectation on the whole appointment system. Now, in a society with the rule of law that maintains a very high standard of integrity is the basis for one country, two systems, and to ensure they can sail far and wide. Now, we will not tolerate anything otherwise. But for that incident, the CS4A has explained under what circumstances the incident happened. It did not involve things you refer to or things being that have gone viral in social media or in the community, and the officials concerned have bear their legal consequences, and they have also paid a price. Other than that, they have apologized to the public. I think the three officials as well as other officials have learned a lesson. They will be more sensitive and prudent in the future. So this is an important matter. But since you mentioned an undertaking I made when I took office, now if you talked about things that I failed to deliver, I think this is one of them. In my election manifesto and also my first policy address, I said that I would amend the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance to make Section 3 and 8 applicable to the Chief Executive. But I haven't done so. I'm not going to do so. And I think this should not be done by the future Chief Executive, because this is an affront to the constitutional position of the Chief Executive. Now, the Chief Executive of the Hong Kong SAR is accountable to the Central People's Government as well as the Hong Kong SAR. He represents the whole Hong Kong SAR. To a certain extent, he is above the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. Now, for the past 20 years or so now, I have checked bills we've passed. There were bills which sought to undermine the position of the chief executive so that we cannot have a constitutional system with the chief executive as the leader, and who is going to be accountable to the Central People's Government. I have said a number of times, and I repeat once here, that I'm not going to differ this pledge. I and the future chief executives should not amend this POB to undermine the constitutional responsibility of the chief executive. The chief executive's question and answer session closes now. The CE will leave. Will members please stand? The chief executive now leaves the chamber. Members, please stand up. The chief executive's question and answer session closes now.